It was supposed to be just another day. Another routine flight. Another shift in the captain's chair. But for one pilot, this day would be anything but ordinary. A boy, no older than 13, stood near the terminal window, eyes locked on the runway, watching the planes take off and land. His fascination was obvious. The way his hands moved as if tracing the flight paths, the way he whispered softly, calculating altitudes, airspeeds. He wasn't causing trouble. He wasn't lost. He wasn't bothering anyone. And yet, someone was watching him. The pilot, a man of experience, a man trusted to carry hundreds of lives across the sky, furrowed his brow as he observed the boy. Something about the scene unsettled him. Maybe it was the backpack slung over his shoulder. Maybe it was the way he stood alone. Maybe it was something else. Security cameras captured the moment. The pilot shifting uncomfortably. A brief glance around the terminal. A hand reaching for his phone. A number dialed. And then the words, "Yes, I'd like to report something suspicious." Airport police responded in minutes. The officers, tall, uniformed, authoritative, made their way toward the boy. He didn't see them coming. Not at first. He was too caught up in the world of aviation, too lost in the magic of flight. But then he felt it. The shift in energy. The presence behind him. The voices calling out. And just like that, everything changed. What happens when a simple day at the airport turns into a confrontation fueled by prejudice? What happens when suspicion overrides reason? And more importantly, what happens when the father of the accused arrives, bringing with him the full weight of the Federal Aviation Administration? Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal hard truths and challenge the way we see the world. Because sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected places. He wasn't just any boy. He wasn't lost. He wasn't wandering aimlessly. He was exactly where he wanted to be. Malik Thompson, 13 years old. A boy with a mind sharp beyond his years, a passion too big for his age. He loved planes, not in the way most kids love them, not just for the way they cut through the sky, but for the science behind them, the mechanics, the calculations. He could name every model that took off from that runway, from the Boeing 737s to the Airbus A380s. He could recite fuel capacities, maximum takeoff weights, flight altitudes, all from memory. For Malik, this wasn't just an airport. It was a classroom. It was inspiration. And today he had a special reason to be here. His father, Jonathan Thompson, was a high-ranking official at the Federal Aviation Administration, a man whose decisions shaped the very industry his son admired. Today, Jonathan was at the airport for a high-profile meeting, a discussion that could change regulations, improve safety, impact lives. Malik was waiting for him, choosing to pass the time in the one place that felt like home, the terminal overlooking the tarmac. But for one man, Malik's presence was a problem. The pilot. A veteran of the skies. A man whose job was to read situations, to anticipate dangers before they happened. To him, flying was about control, control of the aircraft, control of the situation, control of everything in his field of vision. And at that moment, standing in that terminal, something about Malik unsettled him. Maybe it was the way the boy stood alone. Maybe it was the backpack slung over his shoulder. Maybe it was the fact that he was staring so intently, so confidently at the jets outside. Or maybe it was something else. He adjusted his tie, shifting uneasily in his uniform. His eyes darted toward the security officer's station near the gate. Then, almost instinctively, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made the call. "Yes, I'd like to report something suspicious." The words came easily, without hesitation. And with that, the wheels were in motion. The officers responded swiftly, moving through the crowd, their expressions unreadable. They weren't in a rush. This wasn't an emergency, but their approach was deliberate. Calculated. They had seen this before. Malik didn't notice them at first. He was too busy watching the planes, too lost in his own world. But then he felt it. The change in atmosphere. The silence behind him. The presence of authority. Then came the voice. "Hey kid. What are you doing here?" Malik turned slowly, blinking up at the two uniformed men. His hands, once animated with excitement, now hung still at his sides. He had done nothing wrong. He knew that. And yet, something about the way they looked at him made his stomach tighten. "Just watching the planes," he said carefully. The officers exchanged glances. One of them tilted his head slightly, scrutinizing him. "Where are your parents?" "I'm waiting for my dad. He works for the FAA. He's in a meeting right now." A beat of silence. The tension thickened. The first officer shifted his weight. "What's in the bag?" Malik hesitated. Not because he was hiding anything, but because he knew, deep down, that hesitation itself could be seen as guilt. Slowly he lifted the bag from his shoulder and unzipped it. Inside, a notebook filled with flight calculations, a model airplane, a book on aerodynamics. Nothing more. Nothing less. But the officers weren't satisfied. "Step over here, son." The boy felt his pulse quicken. He did as he was told. The pilot watched from a distance, arms crossed, satisfied. He had done his duty. He had seen something, said something. And now, whatever suspicion had settled in his mind would be put to rest. Except, he had no idea who was about to walk through that door. The moment Jonathan Thompson stepped into the terminal, everything would change. Malik had been through this before. Not in an airport, not with police, but in school, in stores, on the sidewalk when walking home. The looks, the questions, the way adults seemed to hesitate before deciding whether or not he belonged. And now here he was again. "Do you have ID?" one of the officers asked, as if a 13-year-old boy waiting for his father should have identification at the ready. "No, sir," Malik answered, his voice steady, though his hands clenched slightly at his sides. "Who exactly is your father?" "Jonathan Thompson. He works for the FAA. He's finishing up a meeting." There was a pause, one that hung in the air, heavy and dismissive. The officers didn't believe him. They had no reason to, at least in their minds. After all, how often did they see a black teenager, alone near the gates, talking about aviation as if he belonged among pilots and air traffic controllers? One of the officers turned slightly, speaking into his radio. "We've got a situation at Terminal 4. Minor, but possible security concern." Security concern. Malik felt his stomach drop. He wasn't naive. He had heard those words before, seen them used as an excuse when someone who looked like him was treated unfairly. And he knew what came next. "We're gonna need you to step aside." The officers gestured toward a quieter corner, away from the main crowd. Away from the eyes of travelers who might notice. Malik hesitated for only a moment, then nodded and complied. He had been taught to comply. The pilot, still watching from a distance, adjusted his uniform. He felt a small sense of validation. He had been right to be suspicious. Hadn't he? A few minutes passed. The questioning continued. "Where do you live? What's in your bag? Are you waiting for someone? Why are you standing here?" Then, something shifted. Across the terminal, the doors to a restricted access conference room swung open. A small group of well-dressed officials stepped out, their voices calm but authoritative as they discussed regulatory matters. Among them, walking with the confidence of someone accustomed to high-stakes environments, was Jonathan Thompson, Malik's father. At first he didn't notice. He was scrolling through an email, responding to a message about new air traffic control protocols. But then he saw it. His son. Surrounded by police. Being questioned. Being treated as if he had done something wrong. Jonathan's stride didn't falter, but his grip on his phone tightened. His mind worked quickly, analyzing the situation, assessing every possible reason this could be happening. But he already knew. He approached with controlled urgency, his polished shoes clicking against the tile floor. Malik saw him before the officers did, his relief almost visible. "Dad." The officers turned just as Jonathan stopped a few feet away, his posture firm but composed. Everything changed in that moment. Jonathan Thompson was not a man easily ignored. "Is there a problem here?" Jonathan's voice was steady, measured, the voice of a man used to handling high-pressure negotiations. One of the officers, the taller one, cleared his throat. "We received a call about suspicious behavior. Just conducting routine questioning." Jonathan's expression remained unreadable, but his next words changed everything. "Suspicious behavior?" He let the words hang for a moment. Then, reaching into the pocket of his tailored suit jacket, he pulled out his official FAA credentials. The shift in energy was instant. The officer straightened. The pilot, still watching from a distance, tensed. Jonathan Thompson was not just another passenger. He was one of the most powerful figures in aviation regulation. He held up his badge just enough for them to see. "Jonathan Thompson. Federal Aviation Administration. Explain to me exactly what warranted this level of scrutiny for my son." Silence. The officers hesitated. The weight of their mistake was sinking in. Jonathan continued, his tone unwavering. Was he causing a disturbance? No answer. Was he trespassing in a restricted area? Still nothing. Or was he simply standing here watching the planes? At that, one of the officers shifted awkwardly. "Sir, we were just following protocol." Jonathan raised a hand slightly, stopping the explanation before it could continue. Your protocol needs re-evaluating. Malik, still quiet, watched as his father took control of the moment. Not with anger, not with raised voices, but with an authority that commanded respect. Then he did something that made the officers even more uncomfortable. He turned to Malik. Son, tell me exactly what happened. Start from the beginning. Malik recounted everything. The way he had been standing there, minding his business. The way the officers approached. The way they immediately assumed he was a problem to be dealt with. Jonathan listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. And when his son finished, he turned back to the officers, his face unreadable. Do you have children? He asked suddenly. The question caught them off guard. One of them nodded slowly. Imagine it was your son. Jonathan's voice remained calm, but the weight of his words was undeniable. Imagine he was standing in an airport waiting for you, excited about something he loved. And instead of seeing opportunity, someone saw a threat. The officers had no response, because there was no justification for what had just happened. Then Jonathan turned slightly, his gaze landing directly on the pilot. And that's when the regret set in. The pilot had made the call. And now, standing in the shadow of the FAA administrator, he realized the full weight of his mistake. Jonathan exhaled slowly. He turned back to the officers. I'm going to need your names. And the name of your superior. The officers swallowed hard. They knew this wasn't over. And the pilot? He had just made a decision that would change his career forever. The officers hesitated, their postures suddenly stiff, their previous confidence melting under the weight of accountability. Jonathan Thompson didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The power in his presence was in the precision of his words. Names? Now. The taller officer cleared his throat, glancing at his partner before speaking. Officer Daniels. The other officer hesitated a second longer. Officer Mitchell. Jonathan nodded slightly, his expression unreadable. Then, he turned his gaze back to the pilot, whose regret was practically visible in the way he gripped the edge of his uniform. His name tag gleamed under the airport lights. Captain Richard Hayes. And you, Jonathan said, his voice steady. You're the one who made the call, aren't you? The pilot's mouth opened slightly as if trying to formulate a response. His throat was dry. I was just being cautious. I thought. Jonathan held up a hand, cutting him off. You thought what? His voice remained calm, but there was a new edge to it. That my son standing here doing nothing was somehow a threat? That a black boy in an airport was so out of place that you needed to involve law enforcement? The pilot blinked, his mind scrambling for words that wouldn't sound like an excuse. But nothing came. Because there was no justification. The pause stretched. Then Jonathan shook his head slightly. What you thought, he said, is exactly why incidents like this keep happening. Because people like you assume before you know. Because people like you don't ask questions, you act first. You weaponize suspicion against people who look like my son. The words landed heavily. A few travelers passing by slowed, sensing the weight of what was unfolding. Malik, still standing close to his father, shifted slightly. He wasn't sure if his father noticed, but for the first time since this all started, he felt safe. And then Jonathan made a decision. He reached into his suit pocket again, pulling out his phone. With practiced ease, he swiped through his contacts and pressed a button. The call rang once. Then an answer. Director Ramirez, Jonathan said, his voice clear. I'm at Terminal 4. We have an incident that needs addressing immediately. The reaction was instant. Both officers stiffened. The pilot inhaled sharply. Because Director Ramirez was not just anyone. She was the head of airport security operations. And she reported directly to the FAA. Mr. Thompson, the pilot started, but Jonathan silenced him with a single look. You had a choice, Captain Hayes. You could have approached my son. You could have spoken to him. Instead you escalated. And now you're going to be held accountable. The officers exchanged glances. They weren't sure how much worse this could get, but then minutes later it did. Because Director Olivia Ramirez arrived. She was efficient. No nonsense. The kind of woman whose authority was clear before she even spoke a word. Jonathan, she said, greeting him formally. Then she turned to the officers and the pilot. I assume you understand why I'm here. No one responded. Jonathan gestured toward Malik. This is my son. He was waiting for me, doing absolutely nothing suspicious. Yet, Captain Hayes here decided he needed police involvement. Officers Daniels and Mitchell escalated instead of assessing. So now, I want to know what the airport intends to do about this. Director Ramirez's expression didn't change. She turned to the officers first. "What's your report?" The two men fumbled slightly, realizing they had no real justification for their actions. Their words were careful, but it was obvious. There was no real security threat. Just bias. She turned next to the pilot. "Captain Hayes, do you understand the gravity of this situation?" His face was pale now. "Director, You were just exercising poor judgment that could have had serious consequences," she interrupted. "And that's unacceptable. You're a commercial pilot. A leader in this airport. You're expected to be trained in de-escalation and assessment. And yet, you acted on bias instead of facts." The silence was suffocating. Then Ramirez exhaled sharply. "Effective immediately, Captain Hayes, you are suspended pending an internal review by the airline. And I assure you the FAA will be involved in that review process." Hayes visibly tensed. A suspension. That was only one step short of something much worse. And he knew it. She turned back to the officers. "As for you two, expect a call from your superior. This is far from over." They didn't argue. They didn't defend themselves. Because they had no defense. Jonathan Thompson, still standing tall, finally glanced down at his son. "Come on, Malik. We're done here." Malik didn't say much as they walked away. But as they reached the exit, he finally spoke. "Dad. Yeah. You handled that differently than I thought you would." Jonathan glanced at him. "How do you mean?" Malik shrugged. "I don't know. You weren't yelling. You weren't angry." Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. "Because anger isn't the only way to win, son." Malik nodded slowly. And as they stepped outside into the evening air, he realized something. Today could have ended very differently. But his father had changed the outcome. And one day he would do the same. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a moment that revealed something deeper. Something that happens every day to people of color across the country. How many times has assumption led to escalation? How many times has bias been mistaken for caution? And how many times has an outcome been far worse than this? What happened to Malik was unjust. But what if he hadn't been the son of a powerful man? What if no one had come to his defense? Racial bias in public spaces is real. It's time we stop ignoring it. If you've ever experienced something like this, or if you've ever witnessed it happening to someone else, share your story in the comments. Because these conversations matter. And if you believe in fighting for awareness, for justice, for change, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. We'll keep telling these stories. Until one day we won't have to anymore. Thank you for watching.